From the Greens, I'll wait for you to catch your channel. So I had a blue card for the deputy from the Greens, but I will ask the question to you. So the competitiveness of the automotive sector will not come from your Green Deal and your magic wand, and you will now say, oh, it's going to be competitive against China. By supporting more regulation, you cause Europe to become more and more of a museum and not be able to compete in the global market, especially with China. Due to your sick ideas, Europe is becoming a historical museum of economy, and your victims are the poorest Europeans who cannot afford new e-vehicle and who will not be able to enter the city with their old car. So where is your interest of the mid-income and low-income Europeans who you want to deprive of the right to own an older combustion engine vehicle? Thank you very much.
Well, Madam President, I would encourage all members of this Parliament to actually read up. How is China competing with Europe at the moment? With what type of technology and what type of cars is China actually beating Europe at the moment? If we want to make sure that Europe is not a museum, if we want to make sure that Europe does have a possibility to stand up in this competition, we need to make sure that the automotive industry in Europe keeps developing, because that is clearly where we haven't done a good enough job. Making sure that we in Europe also develop affordable models of electric cars, that is also important for all of the low-income earners in Europe. That is important for the European workers. So we should combine the possibilities for everyone to make environmentally friendly decisions with an industrial policy through which we secure the jobs in the European automotive industry also in the future.
Grazie. Ora facoltà di intervenire.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mr. Buchheit.
Danke, Frau Präsidentin. Ja, meine
Thank you very much, Madam President. We see a lot of complaints and concerns from the automotive industry. It's as if you're coming to your senses now. The European Green Deal is not a way to promote growth. We're talking about deindustrialization. But we have been pushing this green destructive policy for years. We had people in Volkswagen, for example, who were pushing these types of policies. We had the problems with diesel. We had these very punishing CO2 emissions targets. And now people are looking to see how to become strong again when it comes to production. We need to end this woke business policy. We need to change this direction that we have taken. Thank you very much.
Onorevole Solier.
Mr. Solier.
Madam President, Commissioner, we're going to have another Qatar Gate. Is a foreign power paying to influence European legislation? I'm asking this in such a frank manner because this is the only explanation as to why Europe is producing industrial rules that are killing us. At least yet we can say that you have harmonized laws with other areas such as migration, because just like in Europe we treat illegal immigrants better than local citizens, you have managed to favor foreign technology at the expense of our own, a common market where we treat those coming from outside better. What do you win if Europe is slow, cumbersome, and depends more and more on external technology? The European Association of Automobile Manufacturers confirms that the production in Europe has gone down 20% in the last decade. And at the same time, we've seen exponential increase in imports from places like China. Is this because electric vehicles pollute less? According to data from Transport and Environment, manufacturing of electric vehicles generates up to 70% more emissions than a traditional car. Could the Commission say what we are doing then with batteries and lithium? Why do we not support zero-impact fuels instead of imposing foreign technologies that are polluting and that are not accompanied by infrastructure? We can't be the only region in the world that wants to ban the sales of combustion engines by 2035 as if it was just to save the planet? Why are we giving so many millions in funds? What about the Chinese companies? We will never match China and the United States in their competitive advantage, which, according to Draghi, we need to reduce. Would it not be more logical to invest these funds in developing our own technologies and industrial base? We are clear for whom we are working, but for whom are you working?
Onorevole, blue card for you. Onorevole
Mrs. Hosdova.
from ACR, please.
Mr. Hosdova.
Będę mówił po polsku. Szanowni...
Thank you. I will speak Polish. Ladies and gentlemen, it's the same as with mobile phones. Mobile phones won against traditional phones, not because
this address with my citizens.
We have a problem with translation.
Okay. Okay?
Now is okay, colleagues? Please.
Okay. Okay. Telefon komórkowy
So mobile phones won because free market decided so. There was no top-down ban on having fixed phones, and the same should be valid for cars. So the argument that we need a top-down ban on combustion cars is wrong. Our task is not to defend car industry in Germany, but I don't understand why we are trying to push car industry out of Europe. Why do we want to import technology from outside of Europe? So let's bet on free market and remove top-down regulations. Thank you.
Which is the question, colleagues. It's not a question. if you want, please. Or not. Do you want to reply or not? Okay.
Yes, but what was the question? What we were saying is that we cannot influence and put rules on electric cars. We need to invest in fuel technology and combustion so that we have proper technology in place.
The next one, Onorevole De La Hoz.
Mr. De La Hoz Quintano.
Gracias.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Good afternoon. The automotive industry crisis is not a threat, it's an absolute reality. And when we face this reality, citizens, especially the millions of workers in the car industry who don't have a clear future, they all need concrete action. That is why it's absolutely necessary to roll up our sleeves and get down to work in order to push through reforms and in order to retweak our policies, including our climate policy. If we don't want to be overwhelmed by doped competition from abroad, our climate policy is one of the problems for the car industry. We have imposed certain measures on the industry, but they cannot be achieved. We seem to be punishing manufacturers. We want to impose huge fines on them, and they are unjustified. It is absolutely necessary to look forward and to review the whole issue of 2035 in order to overhaul the intermediate targets. And we really have to look at the role of biofuels, synthetic fuels, and make sure that we honor the principle of technological neutrality. We have to look at 2035 and post-2035 and the role of these kind of vehicles in the future. If we don't do this now, then we will pay a very high price when it comes to jobs and destruction in the car sector that is a flagship sector for the EU. We have a blue card. Mr. Buda would like to use his blue card. Mr. Buda, ECR.
Please, per favore, una
Panie
domanda.
Przewodniczący, Szanowni Państwo,
Stand up.
ja chciałem zapytać. Yes, I speak Polish. Czy mamy już tłumaczenie?
Do we have interpretation? Madam President, Commissioner, and dear colleague, for years you have been promoting the Green Deal, and we are now meeting plenary after plenary, and all sectors will come to us as the victims of the Green Deal. When we were competing with traditional combustion engine vehicles, we had no problems with the automotive sector from China. Now, with e-vehicles, we are losing that competition all of a sudden. It will be the same as with solar panels. First, we introduced green energy, and then it turns out that 95% of solar panels are from China. So it is your actions that have led us to a situation where we have a huge crisis in the automotive sector. So just admit it and withdraw from your decisions on the Green Deal and low-emission vehicles and penalizing producers. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, before I give the floor to Mr. de la Hons Quintana, we just need to make sure that the way we work is very clear. As you know, you can use a blue card, but you have to actually put a question to the MEP who's just spoken. We cannot use blue cards in order to give speeches on general issues. So from now on, if you want to use a blue card and put a question to the person, then that's fine. We will grant this request. But if you're going to do it just to tell us what you think, then it won't be possible. I hope that I've been clear. Mr. de la Hons Quintana. Yes, thank you very much. Yes, even though there wasn't an actual question, I'm going to try and give you an answer. The EPP has a very clear vision. Industrial policies that look at the future of EU industry always have to dovetail with climate policies. They mustn't be subordinate to these policies. Thank you.
Please.
Thank you. Mr. Mika. Mr. Nitsa, I beg your pardon.
Thank you, President, Commissioner. Why is the European industry losing its competitiveness? Let's look at two examples. First example, the steel industry. We've lost over 20 million tons of production capacity in the past decades for several reasons. First, the price of energy is very high and very volatile. It can go up 200% during 1 year. Second, we are talking about imports from outside the European Union, which are much cheaper because those people there don't pay any kind of taxes, no carbon taxes and so on. So you have two products on your market, a very cheap one from outside the European Union and a more expensive one made in the European Union. Of course, everyone will pay the cheap one. This has led to bankruptcy for much of this industry. Now, let's talk about the automotive industry. We're in the same situation. On one hand, those who work in the European automotive industry have to pay all these taxes and have to pay this very high energy prices, unacceptably high prices for energy. On the other hand, Europeans have to face the imports of cheap cars from China, where these cars are being subsidized both by the states directly and by the fact that they don't have to pay any taxes. So you have two kinds of cars in the European Union, one made in China, which is much more cheaper than the one made in the European Union. Therefore, European-made cars sell less, profitability goes down, and this, of course, has led to factories being closed down and people losing their job, like we've seen this in the past few years. The solution is not to ask the Chinese to pay 15 billion euros, but to invest in research and production of cars in the European Union. Thank you very much.
Mr.
Gyurk.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Colleagues, The European automotive industry is in crisis. Every day in the news we see the danger of jobs being lost. And this is the result of Ms. von der Leyen's 5-year term of office. We now need to take action. We need to also provide a framework for the automotive industry which gives them assistance. We need to listen to proposals from the industry itself. We need to review the climate goals, and we need to make them perhaps more reasonable. And secondly, we need to do our utmost to improve the global competitiveness of our automotive industry. The steps taken by Brussels so far have done nothing but reduce its competitiveness. And this is incredibly important to highlight. It's unacceptable that bureaucrats want to impose punitive tariffs, which will also reduce our competitiveness. We need to safeguard jobs as well and focus on reducing the administrative burden, developing infrastructure, and also providing programs for industry and the local population. And the proposal package under the Hungarian Presidency is worth looking at in this regard. 13 million people in Europe, 500,000 in Hungary work in the automotive industry. We, patriots, are fighting for them. Thank you very much.
Grazie, onorevole Vondra. Please.
Thank you very much. Mr. Vondra.
Ladies and gentlemen, what we are witnessing today is not a transformation of the car industry in Europe. It is its managed liquidation. Liquidation under the name of Green Deal being led by the European Commission. Manufacturers faced with expensive energy prices and overregulation are fleeing to the US, India and China. Millions of workers are being downsized. Tariffs are not going to help. Things are simply going to get more expensive. And there isn't enough money, and there will not be enough money for social transfers. Things that don't function need to be changed. Without delay, we need to review the Green Deal. We need to drop the fines, which are supposed to enter into validity next year and will simply liquidate our car industry. We need to drop the combustion engine ban, and we need to allow for competition and for finding solution on the basis of technological neutrality. This is the only way to help our car industry survive in Europe.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Vedren.
Merci à vous.
Hier, nos entreprises étaient des
In the past, our industries were leaders when it came to solar panels. Our car industry was going to be ready for the future, but where are we today? Our solar sector has been devastated. Our electric car industry is going down the same slippery slope. We are seeing the US and China investing huge quantities in the future, whereas Europe is simply paralyzed. We are faced with a flood of electric Chinese cars, and all we have are symbolic tariffs. It's not enough. Europe needs an ambitious industrial strategy. We need to take control again of our strategic supply chains. We cannot be dependent anymore. We need to reform our competition rules so that we can favour our European companies. We need a real industrial plan with targeted, coherent investment that takes into account the needs of our companies. That should be our top priority. It is a question of sovereignty and economic survival. Are the Commission and Member States ready to do this? Do you have the political will to act with the same determination as our international rivals? Our future is at stake. We cannot remain paralysed. Thank you.
Tegedov.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tegedov.
Thank you, Chair. Dear Commissioner, Europe's car industry is trapped in a daydream in which it can pursue business models of the past, while in reality the rest of the world moves forward. Delaying the transition to electromobility is like hitting the snooze button on the morning alarm. You get a short-term reward, but end up behind schedule. The tariffs agreed last week will temporarily reset that imbalance caused by Chinese government subsidies, but they don't solve the problem. We need industry to see the green transition as a chance, not a threat. We need a clear vision for our automotive sector. We need a plan to ensure EU manufacturers become globally competitive. We need to increase the affordability of electric vehicles in the EU, and we need to drastically reduce emissions of the transport sector. Stop hitting the snooze button over and over again. Present us a forward-thinking industrial policy for local, clean electric vehicles. And finally, wake up.
L'onorevole Sjosted
Mr. Hörsted.
is in the list, yeah.
Tack så mycket, fru talman.
Thank you very much, Madam President. As a car worker previously, I see how far Europe is behind. We see China producing more electric cars than fossil fuel-based cars. It's easier and cheaper to produce. Also looking at a successful policy with regards to batteries. The EU, on the other hand, has an old-fashioned ban on this type of state support, a more proactive industrial policy that is hindering our transition and our ability to help our companies. That is what we need to really be competitive and to see reduced electricity prices as well, so we can actually compete. The European car industry is simply not going to be able to provide the jobs of the future with today's technology. Having this climate transition is absolutely vital, but what we need to do that is a really active industrial policy. Thank you very much, Madam President.
Thank you very much, Mr. Drose.
Frau Präsidentin, Herr Kommissar.
Thank you, Madam President. Commissioner. Now, when it comes to the future Chancellor of Germany, Alice Weidel, and the former President of the Czech Republic, I think it's important to think about this issue. We are seeing the German car industry being destroyed by this crazy green policy. Millions of hard-working people at automotive industries are being pushed into poverty. Every single, you may do all this work, bureaucracy in Brussels, but there are plenty of people working very hard in these factories. The answer is very easy. This commissioner says that they want to combat individual mobility. This commission wants us to eat grasshoppers, for example, wants to monitor us 24 hours a day. It doesn't want to have a mobile, peaceful, flexible Europe. This is all based on a dystopian vision.
Mr. Zieper.
Verehrte Damen und Herren,
Ladies and gentlemen, as you can see from the title, there is a crisis facing the EU's automotive industry. And in a time of crisis, we should stand together. We should focus on our strength. Now, I'm not surprised when we've heard of closures in the German automotive industry. It seems when you're comparing the situation to China with the Uyghurs who are working in conditions similar to concentration camps, we are here in Europe. We are building the fastest, best, nicest cars. So I would like to say we need to stand with the European automotive industry. We have a strong industry, strong manufacturing, strong workers. We should be there to support and to save the European automotive industry.
Please.
Mr. Radke.
Frau Vizepräsidentin, Herr
Thank you very much, Madam Vice President, Commissioner, colleagues. I remember very well when here in Strasbourg we debated the ban on combustion engines. And Franz Timmermans was sitting where Mr. Dombrovskis is sitting. He's responsible for this policy. And I pointed out two things in my speech. Number one, how affordability mobility should be and how explosive this is socially. And secondly, I talked about the employment policy consequences of such a policy, and the reaction of Franz Timmermans was just to simply sit there with his arms folded, and he laughed loudly. And I said at that time, with that kind of attitude, you are going to just fuel populists and extremists. That is the reality that we are seeing. I warned about this before, and that is all being seen now. Therefore, it's important to look at the time frame we have. We really need to act swiftly to revise the limit values. But I don't want to just make this a black and white issue. No, we need to make it clear. We need to move away thinking about what comes out of the exhaust pipes. We need to look at the whole CO2 balance of the vehicle. Green steel, for example, that's another issue. We need to look at the whole picture, the whole vehicle. But we have to be clear as well what the government is doing in Germany. In a car country, the FDP is in one direction, the Greens are in another, and the government there does not know what it wants. Therefore, we need to show that we are clear about where we are going.
Mrs. Keulemans.
Merci, Présidente.
Thank you very much. Of course, we don't have to reiterate how important the automotive industry is in the European Union. We've talked about 14 million of direct and indirect jobs and huge manufacturing value. Now, when it comes to net exports, we have a surplus, but yet there are very worrying signs that make us fear what might happen to the car industry. The Green Deal is and must remain ambitious when it comes to decarbonization and mobility. But despite this, we truly regret the fact that the industry didn't manage to anticipate electrification and that they are lagging behind. So this is a moment of truth for Europe when it comes to our commitments to reindustrialization and backing this key sector. Last week, the Socialists and Democrats sent a delegation that went to visit the Audi plant in Brussels in order to speak to the workers. Let me remind you that at this plant, the workers were brutally told that there would be relocation to Mexico. And they were also told that the plant would close down. This means 3,000 people will lose their jobs. These are direct jobs, and almost as many indirect jobs will be lost as well. Now, the fear is that this is just the first of many social and economic catastrophes that will take place in the EU. The visit to this plant was harrowing because the Audi plant isn't some old, obsolete plant. It's a zero-emission plant, and we're talking about high technology and added value cars with highly skilled workers that know the ins and outs of new technologies. So we're talking about a complete waste if we go ahead with this plant closure. The time has come for the EU to face its responsibilities vis-à-vis workers in the car industry and the car sector in general if we don't want to lose it forever. Please stick to your speaking time. Mrs. Bonte.
Dank u, voorzitter, commissaris. Ja, de Europese auto-industrie.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. The European car industry is in a difficult situation. The numbers are very clear. We have Audi in my country, for example, that is closing down, and we risk reaching a point of no return, an economic graveyard. It is important for us to avoid all of that. And I think the country those primarily responsible are the EU. They put in place this Green Deal. They have put in place these new rules on reducing emissions. These are measures that have had very serious consequences. And now we're focusing on the production of electric vehicles, while at the same time investments have been made to improve internal combustion engine vehicles. So consumers don't really know what to do anymore. It is difficult for them to buy electric vehicles. All of these changes have happened too abruptly. Manufacturers and consumers need to have a free choice once again. We need to make these rules more flexible when it comes to CO2 emissions. It's only in this way that we'll be able to save the European automotive industry. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Van Overveld.
Commissaris, collega's, de crisis in onze
Thank you very much, Madam President, Commissioner, colleagues. The crisis in our automotive industry is the canary in the coal mine. And what we need to focus on is our prosperity, but now we are facing very bad weather. How can we tackle this? Now, we need a framework. We can have investment. We also need to simplify regulation and ensure compliance and conformity with the market. And we also need to take another look at the Green Deal, focusing on the economic and social consequences of it. And there's also significant unfair competition from China. Of course, tariffs can play a role, but we need to focus first and foremost on stricter quality requirements.
Mrs. Hahn.
Die Automobilbranche.
Our car industry is facing enormous pressure. We have a lot of bureaucracy, higher energy prices. Now, we have the EU that has really hobbled the car industry by permanently over-regulating. It is very important to deregulate, to remove bureaucracy, but actually the Commission is trying to solve the problem with China by putting in place these tariffs that will hit other industries. Having these tariffs in one particular sector are not going to solve this structural conflict. And we don't even have all of the member states voting in favour. So we see a divided EU, and the only winner is China. It is important to work together with those from the car industry to come to new trade agreements to open up new markets, and we hope Mercosur will finally be approved. Having this type of growth will guarantee more jobs, not the fantasies that we're being sold today. Thank you.
Mrs. Bai.
Chers collègues.
Ladies and gentlemen, I come from a region that has been affected by deindustrialization with tens of thousands of jobs lost. Is this the fault of an environmental approach? No. On the contrary, there is investment thanks to Europe in decarbonized cars in order to go further in a just and sustainable transition. We have to provide long-term support. To support them is to protect them in the face of unfair competition and unfair practices. I am surprised, I even feel indignant that when the time comes in order to protect workers more, in order to overhaul our customs duties and tariffs, certain countries and political groups in this House are backtracking and use the environment as a scapegoat. If we want to have a more robust and solid car industry that's more sustainable for our workers, then we have to show solidarity. Thank you very much. Mrs. Mesure.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam President. The European industrial policy is a real fiasco. We're losing our strategic industry one after the other. First it was shipbuilding, solar panels, and now it's the turn of our car industry, and we're talking about 13 million jobs. Why is this? This is because the EU market is one of the most open in the world. The US and Canada are imposing Chinese vehicles, but it took us 13 months to increase tariffs by 50% on these vehicles. And what about batteries and other parts? So even here in the suburbs of Strasbourg, there are people who might lose their jobs. Why don't you go and see them and tell these workers that you're not doing anything for them in the suburbs of this very city? Now, please come up with a proper protectionist policy in order to save the automotive industry and to make sure that we have industrial sovereignty.
Prego.
Mr. Bausemer.
Ja, sehr geehrte Frau Vorsitzende.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Colleagues, there aren't many charging stations and the prices are high. Now, this may not be a problem for the green for the green politicians, but this has cost German people billions of Europe, and the environmental subsidy has been stopped for electric vehicles. Volkswagen, the biggest European manufacturer, wants to get rid of 30,000 jobs. Now, the European Commission then wants to impose punitive tariffs to punish China. Now, Robert Habeck is destroying our economy. We need to end this horror story, and we need to continue the use of the combustion engine. We need to move away from this green policy and return to our senses. Thank you.
Grazie, onorevole Geisel.
Thank you very much. Mr. Geisel.
Frau Präsidentin.
Madam President, Commissioner, dear colleagues. It's true the European car industry is facing a crisis, but before we put protective tariffs in place or subsidize, we should think about how we ourselves are responsible for this. I'm absolutely convinced that when we decided to ban combustion engines from 2035, this was a big mistake. Politics is not there to ban technology. Politics is there to help create the right conditions for a more climate-friendly future, and that can be done, for example, by making sure we follow the polluter pays principle. Now, if this means in the end we just have electric cars in the future or more efficient combustion engines, that is up to the market to decide. Companies and consumers will find the best solution. If we want to help the car industry, we need to have clear, reliable framework conditions in place. Banning technologies, bureaucratic micromanagement is not going to help promote innovation or competitiveness for the European car industry. Thank you very much.
Prego.
Thank you very much. Mr. Salini.
Grazie.
Thank you very much. Now, the negotiations were very tricky when we looked at the regulation on the new standards on light vehicles, and now we can feel the impact of that. We said that the industry felt very confused about what was in the regulation. We tried to rein that in, but we only managed partially. We've got the 2035 target. We've been partially contesting how the emissions will be checked. You probably remember that during the negotiations, there was a request to change the tailpipe approach. with a life cycle approach. In other words, checking the entire life cycle of the car and the fuel. But because we didn't plump for that option, we took the wrong path regarding the 2035 target. But then we also have the 2025 fine problem for those manufacturers who won't reach the target for low-emission vehicles. So what's going to happen? Many companies will have to reduce production to meet the targets, which will sideline them in the market. So we're asking our car makers to exit the market, while at the same time we're asking them to be more competitive when it comes to sustainability. We have to be reasonable. We have to give our industry a future. We need a green industry, not a closed industry.
Prego.
Mr. Lange.
Frau Vorsitzende, Herr Kommissar, liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen.
Madam President, Commissioner, colleagues, it's good that we're talking about this today because for a long time we haven't really mentioned this because together we want to take measures in order to secure jobs in the automotive sector. If we look at what's happened in Norway in the past year, 82% of the new vehicles are e-vehicles, and this has been achieved through clarity in policy. But going back and forth is not good for investment and it's not good for consumers. We need clarity. And then we also need measures, Commissioner. We need clear rules on aid, clear rules on batteries. We also need industry electricity prices and also countervailing duties for unfair competition. And suppliers of cars also need to be involved. We can't just have cars over 50,000 euros. We need vehicles that are accessible to ordinary workers who allow those people to start using these e-vehicles. And this is something that needs to be supported by member states in the EU. And if we do that, then there will be an opportunity for the automotive industry in Europe. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Turek.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Green Deal is hurting the European industry. The automotive industry in the EU is in the worst condition in history. Our car industry is 7% of EU GDP and gives 13.8 million jobs. The Green Deal puts all of this at risk. Every year we spend 60 billion euros on R&D. We are a global automotive powerhouse. Now we might end up buying batteries from China. We had a 74 billion euro trade surplus. Now we might buy more from Asia. This destroys our economy. Provisions like the 2025 fleet emissions target kill our industry. We risk losing production of 2 million profitable cars or paying around 15 billion euros in fines, simply because people don't want to buy electric vehicles. This is crazy. For every factory we close to open in China, this really won't change the global climate. Let's stop destroying the UK industry. Let's stop destroying ourselves. Let's stop destroying our common future. Thanks.
Grazie, onorevole Fidanza, prego.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fidanza. Thank you very much, Madam President. Vice President, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to read the words of Stellantis car manufacturers. As distributors, we are in touch with final customers that often say no to electric vehicles because they're worried about autonomy, accessibility, and price. because we also have these very strict EU rules. So from our point of view, it's pretty clear the sector isn't ready to produce the volume of sales that is necessary for electric vehicles. So we have these problems with expectations and readiness. So it's not a surprise when EU manufacturers ask for us to postpone this, and we support this. The Italian government put a proposal on the table. It's not just about postponing fines by a few months. We have to be bold enough to have an overall discussion on electric vehicles immediately and EVs only. We have to defend internal combustion engines, and by doing this, technological neutrality, workers, biofuels, and investment in technologies and sectors that we have the control over instead of being dependent on China. We still have time to do something as long as we put these car destructive policies on the back burner. Mr. Canfin.
Monsieur le Commissaire.
Commissioner, colleagues, today's debate is the crisis facing the EU's automotive industry. The European car industry, its manufacturers, made record profits in 2023. Almost all of them made significant profits in the first semester of 2024. So that's great. So let's be clear about the reality of the situation and the political ideology. Just blaming the Green Deal for everything that's not working in Europe. It's important we continue to support the automotive industry during its transition. Of course, we need an industrial policy. We want to see the battery industry properly developed in Europe. It's something we started to do 5 years ago, and we need to continue and not go back. The second point is fair trade agreements. That is why I'm very pleased on behalf of the French delegation in Renew that the European Commission and the Member States have finally put in place tools in order for us to tackle unfair competition from China. Thank you very much.
Honorable Canfin.
Thank you. We have a request for a blue card. Mr. Canfin?
Honorable Frigo.
Mrs. Frigo.
Please.
Microphone, please.
Micro, please.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Monsieur Canfin, vous continuez.
Thank you very much, Mr. Canfin. You continue to support the Green Deal, but it's creating carnage for our industry. It's not reality. You're completely disconnected from the actual situation. You want to impose your ideology on us, but at what price? It's the Europeans that are having to pay the price of this. You changed your opinion when it came to nuclear, and I think you should change your mind on this too. It is time to stop sacrificing our industry in this way. Madam, I come from a region in Hauts-de-France. There are many members from the Rassemblement National. There are 40,000 jobs that are going to be created in Dunkirk, just in one area, thanks to the decarbonisation of our industry, developing nuclear, developing renewable energies. That is the Green Deal. Tell those people getting these new jobs that you want to destroy those jobs. I believe in the future. I believe in innovation. I believe in European talent, contrary to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Canfin. Please, for the rest of the work, you can request blue cards, but you have to ask a question if you do so. You have to ask a question to the colleague who is speaking. And I'll give the floor to Madam Scuderi. Thank you, Chair. The territory that I represent has always played a key role in the automotive sector. Stellantis has set out what we are experiencing. There are thousands of people who have been working in this, and now we've heard that 25,000 jobs are at risk throughout the chain. But let's make one thing clear. This is not a crisis of the car. It's not the result of moving towards electrified cars. It goes much further back than that. It's decades of political and economic choices that have been wrong. Instead of investing in innovation and sustainability, we've decided to focus on maximising shareholder profit, subsidising fossil fuels, offshoring, and this has all been done at the cost of workers. Today, yes, we can look to the future and take the opportunity offered by electric cars, or are we going to choose to focus on inefficient technology just to satisfy the fossil fuel lobbies? So instead of giving a gift to China, what we're doing is giving them our market. This is a globalized market. The globalized car market is going to be electric. We have to sell our vehicles. What we need is a clear industrial plan for the future, one will ensure guarantees for investments and to ensure that we'll have support for workers during this transitional period. Thank you. Thank you. I'll now give the floor to Madame Rackete.
I want to share a story of inspiration and hope from Italy. 3 years ago, the automotive supplier GKN decided to close its production plant in close to Firenze and dismiss 800 workers. They called a permanent workers' assembly and occupied the factory. Here it becomes interesting because they didn't ask GKN to keep producing car parts. They decided to convert the factory into a production site for cargo bikes and solar panels. When I met them last year, they asked me to share this message with you because they want a new regulation across Europe to support workers. Every time when a corporation decides to close a factory and the workers are at risk to lose their jobs, the workers should have the right to propose a conversion plan and move forward on their own terms in this factory. Yes, this is radical, but needed. We can't continue to build cars as if there was no climate crisis. The workers know that, and that is why we as legislators should provide them the possibilities to lead this ecological conversion.
Grazie, onorevole Anderton.
Thank you. Now, Madam Arndt.
No, è già intervenuta l'onorevole Donazzi.
The Speaker Donazzi spoke earlier, so what we're trying to do is to manage all of the requests coming from colleagues. Thank you. Go ahead, please. Madam Arndt.
Danke, Frau Präsidentin und Herr.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Thank you very much, President. Now, what we're experiencing here in the EU is an unexperienced in the past fight against the car, or is it a fight against the ability for our citizens to be able to move freely? So we have these different CO2 levels that have been established in 2010 by the European Union. Now it's 95 grams per kilometer per car. For any additional gram, the producer must, per car, pay €95 in fines. And at the same time, many electric cars are being sold with zero CO2 emissions. So now we have a situation which is totally unprecedented, and the penalties and fines, let's look at them in this will undoubtedly lead in the future by 2035 to the death of the car, of the combustion engine car. So for whom is this in this particular parliament? Who would support this? This has to be quashed altogether. We at the AfD were against this. Germany needs the EFD and Europe requires the ESN.
Thank you. Please stick to the speaking times. Madam Solis Perez. Thank you, President, Commissioner. The automotive sector is the jewel in the crown of European industry, and Spain is part of this. We know China's response with electrical vehicles. We know what the United States' response has been, but what is Europe's response? Do we have legislation that sets out objectives? Yes, but we don't have the mechanisms to meet these objectives. We're lacking a shared vision and a long-term vision. Here, we're not just talking about job losses and closures. We're also talking about technology, a loss of technological sovereignty. The two most added value parts of an electrical car, chips and batteries, are not being made in Europe, and whoever holds the key to that technology will dominate the world. So what we need to do is act. Electrification means that we have to meet our not 2035 objectives, but 2025 with fines if necessary. So we need to see regulations to ensure that Europe will have the tools necessary to move towards electrification. We need to have charging points, prepare our networks, and electric cars that are affordable for citizens. Also, in the review, the Commission has to take account of all available technology for decarbonisation, including biofuels. Thirdly, as my colleague asked, we need to see a specific plan for our automotive sector. And finally, as this Parliament has adopted, we need to see a fair transition fund to provide support for regions that are dependent on the automotive sector during the transition. We're starting a new mandate, and we hope that over the next 5 years we'll be able to tackle these challenges. Thank you. Mr. Danielson.
Fru talman, kommissionären, den gröna omställningen är en fantastisk.
There's been a big change which offers opportunity. In Sweden, 50,000 additional jobs have been created, but it's a challenge. Europe has to adapt to this technological change. It's not about whether the change will happen, but whether or not cars and batteries will be manufactured in China or in Europe. It's incredible to hear some of what's being said here in the Parliament, that batteries being manufactured in Europe is an issue. We have to continue people talking about selling diesels after 2035, but that's the wrong track to take. We're behind. We're behind on technological progress. And if we put the brakes on, we're going to be even further behind in 5 years. We have to be aware of that. The environmental requirement is crucial. We have to protect ourselves. We need a European strategy so that we can manufacture more in Europe, so that we can improve our technological know-how and industrial capacity. We need to focus on energy. That's how we can build up European industry so that it's strong and so that we can carry on manufacturing cars on our continent.
Thank you, Mr. Haider.
Mercedes wants to sell off. The Volkswagen industry wants to close down many of its production units. Other installations, other production places and plants are being closed in Poland and elsewhere. Those are some of the headlines in newspapers recently. The European automotive industry is dying. What is the EU doing? It's nothing, doing nothing, essentially. When the EU Commission makes any decision with regard to this, it is the wrong decision. And not only in the automotive sector, technology, numerous different sectors, failure there as well. And the banning of certain of the further production of combustible cars and creating a situation where that is not facilitated, this is a problem as well. And all of this because of the EU regulations in place. And an effort is being made with different penalties and fines to deal with the situation. This is the wrong way. It doesn't work. It doesn't work with this CO2 mechanism. It doesn't work in the automotive sector either. The important thing would be to strengthen local industry. But but not destroy it with these new, so to say, innovative approaches. We need something that will support European industry. The new Green Deal is totally colored ideologically, and it is undermining European industry. Thank you.
Mr. Bay, please.
Traverse l'industrie automobile française et européenne.
The crisis being faced by the French automotive sector has been caused by you. It's your Green Deal, your bureaucratic monster, your unrealistic objectives, basically your whole ideology. You're responsible, you're guilty for the decline of the strategic sector and future factory closures and the unemployment that will lead to. For example, you're forcing manufacturers with the Clean Air regulation for electric vehicles to make up 1/5 of their sales. If they can't force consumers to buy electric cars, then the factories are going to face huge fines, up to several billion euros. So that's basically a death sentence. So there are two things that you can do to save our automotive sector. First of all, to fight against unfair competition from China. Perhaps it's too late. It's already underway. You should have listened to us earlier. Secondly, we have to push back these deadlines. We need to give more time to manufacturers to ensure that they are exempt from these ridiculous fines, to build a more realistic, sensible way forward for those in the industry, one that is more adapted to the market, that is not so rigid and is not stuck to this socialist planning that is destined to fail. Industry is key to our prosperity, and we have to save it while we still have time. Thank you, Madam Kabachova.
Kolegyne, kolegovia, ak chceme v Európe zvyšovať konkurenciu od automobilového priemyslu,
if we want to improve competitiveness, we need to move to electric cars. We have no choice, really. Even China has realized this. I am a Slovak citizen, and I'm saying this openly. And Slovakia, considering this, is the largest car producer per capita, really, nowadays. What we see is a fully electrified car production in China. These sectors will give jobs to people in areas that are struggling otherwise, providing jobs. If we really want to maintain production, we need to focus on investments, including charging stations. Slovakia, the Slovak government, is going to built or was supposed to build 3,029 charging stations, but it hasn't so far built any single one. The investigation by the Commission considering Chinese vehicles has shown that the instrument was legitimate, and yet answers are still lagging behind. So let's look at what our producers need for them to make sure that they maintain this process of transformation to electric mobility and that they not lag behind. Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear Commissioner, dear colleagues. The European automotive industry is at a defining moment, as some manufacturers are warning of potential plant closures and job losses due to unfair competition and high production costs, and there are also calls to roll back CO2 regulations. But stepping back on our climate goals is not the solution. We hear the concerns of workers, and we stand by them in the effort to protect jobs and secure a sustainable future for Europe. So instead, we must use this challenge as a catalyst to lower energy costs and foster innovation. The recent decision to impose tariffs on electric vehicles from China is a positive step in protecting our industry from unfair competition. However, we also need a comprehensive green industrial action plan for automotive industry, covering all stages of the value chain. It's crucial to invest more in Europe's own electric vehicle production, reinforcing our battery supply chains and accelerating the development of the recharging and refueling infrastructure. Rather than loosening CO2 limits, we should focus on creating sustainable long-term jobs by supporting electric vehicles, exploring alternative fuels like hydrogen, and implementing retraining programs for workers. Europe cannot only maintain jobs, but must lead the transition to clean technology. Thank you.
Grazie, onorevole Tridico, prego.
Thank you, Mr. Tridico.
Presidente.
President, Vice President, colleagues. Now there is a serious danger that the Italian automotive industry will collapse completely. The various different sites where research is conducted is suffering terribly. Now, of course, what we're focusing on is the future, what we can do so that the demand for consumption and consumption go hand in hand. And here's where the problem lies. Now, producing electrical cars for all citizens and not only for export as well. It's important to provide for public transport as well. In other words, electric vehicles for transport. So once again, bring together what there's a demand for and what is produced. It's important to encourage the use of private mobility through electric vehicles and public mobility as well. We need a European fund to protect and to promote electric mobility as well, and the resources have to be there to provide as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Berenson.
Ja, dank u wel, mevrouw de voorzitter, beste collega's. Op dit dossier komt heel veel samen.
Thank you very much, President, colleagues. There's a lot of variables here, and we have to take a considered decision. One side of the House wants to drop the rules, and the other wants to go forward in a blinkered fashion. But the extremes are not the answer. We have promised our children that we would work on a climate-neutral Europe, and that promise still stands. And to do that, we need clean cars. We have the technology, the batteries, but there's unfair competition from China. China is subsidizing enormously, and it can also get manufacture plastics more cheaply. So we have to make sure that our industry face the same challenge in the future. This is China's strategy. There are other sectors where you have a lot of subsidies. The EU does nothing. So we have cars and buses now, but for machine engineering and airplanes, that's what's coming our way in the future. So we need to act.
De Caro.
Thank you, Mr. De Caro.
Grazie, signora Presidente.
Thank you very much, President. Colleagues, the crisis in the sector is dramatic indeed, but it's not collected to ecological transition. It's simply that people want to continue with these huge investments where they are, and they don't want to make the necessary transition that's necessary to achieve those 2035 goals. Now, with the ecological situation, with the environmental situation, and the adjustments that have been made, it's very important to draw lessons from this particular paradigm that's developing and implement, develop new technologies indeed. We need the incentives there, public and private as well, so that research, development, and the conversion can take place in the direction of electric. Investing in human capital to maintain production in Europe as well. We need the introduction of measures as well at all levels, at the level of undertakings, public, private, once again. Also, the social leasing experiments that have been made have reduced the cost of energy. Europe can be on the forefront of a transition, environmental transition, social transition as well, protecting the health of our planet, the health of our continent, and protecting jobs as well.
Thank you. I remind you just to stick to the time. And now, Mr. Christopans.
College.
Dear colleagues, 2 years ago in my region, in the Northern Europe, there was an event with major media coverage. A Swedish company, Northvolt, had opened a factory for electric vehicle batteries. It was announced at the time that there had already been contracts concluded for billions of euros to produce batteries for BMW, Volkswagen, and Volvo. Meanwhile, a few weeks ago, there was a much less covered piece of news. This same Swedish company is about to reduce the number of employees by 1,600, or 1/4 of the total number of staff. The Swedish government has already announced that it will not be helping the company overcome its financial difficulties. Each of these redundancies has a human life behind it, family, children. The officials and politicians in Brussels who created the shining illusion of the electric vehicle future will continue sipping their beers in the pubs of Brussels. Their family budgets will stay unaffected. During the first 8 months of this year, there have been only 90,000 electric vehicles, or 12% of the planned amount, sold in the EU. What we are experiencing now is not a mere crisis in the car industry, but a catastrophe with consequences that will last for years. And the most problems will be created for the consumer, since we will be forcing upon them an expensive, fancy, urban toy that otherwise would be bought by only 10 or maximum 20% of the drivers. And they will be forced to use them also in the freezing temperatures of -20. Mr. Dombrovskis, please try and correct this error. If you don't do that, it will have to be done by the next commission that we will elect in 2029. But it might be too late already. Thank you.
The situation of the car industry in Romania can be described by Romanian saying, it's the cobbler that has broken shoes. Romania is the 6th country in Europe in terms of number of cars produced annually. Over 513,000 units over the year 2023, cars produced in Romania. Then Romania is one of the first countries in the EU of a fleet of used cars, old cars of over 16 years. We have over 5.23 million old cars older than 16 years. So Romanian citizens, although Romania produces new cars, cannot afford new cars. These numbers that clash with reality show how efficient, in between inverted commas, the green transition policies is. Romanians can't get rid of their old cars because they can't afford new cars. So this greening needs to look into programs for helping people to get rid of old cars in order to buy new cars. So I want to ask the Commission, what is the Commission going to do in order to make sure that they don't leave anyone behind? The speaker says in English.
Thank you. I now give the floor to Vice President Wilmers.
Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, President. Commissioner, behind today's debate, we have real-life situations like Audi Forest, where 3 million jobs, 3 million people's jobs are under threat, to say nothing of all of the indirect employment under threat. Of course, every business is different, but we have to find solutions to protect both competitiveness and employment in this sector, because behind the jobs there are families with their plans. And behind those jobs, there is the question of purchasing power. This is one of the main concerns of citizens of Europe. The cost of cars manufactured in Europe is 30% more expensive. You've said that. There's a trend towards electrification of the car fleet, and fines will be imposed on certain types of car. But we need a plan. We need to go quickly with that plan so that we have manufacture of enough e-cars quickly enough for all of our citizens at a price they can afford. So we need a strategy and we need a schedule to do that.
Thank you, Madame Brickmont.
Audi Forêt
sees 3,000 people with their jobs at risk, 4,000 if you count subcontractors. Thousands of people at risk, lives upturned because of the poor industrial choices by Audi managers. But we are also seeing no European coordinated strategy or strategic investments, and an absolute belief in a deregulated world that will favour European industry, when that's absolutely not the case. The United States and China have made competition unfair by massively supporting their industries. Europe has to take urgent measures, such as for tariffs on Chinese electrical vehicles, and also take its own industry in hand, because we have to be able to face up to the future. And to do that, we need to do it through a strategy that is in line with the Green Deal, one that is put together with public and private actors and unions, and huge European investment focusing on local quality jobs that will respect ILO conventions and workers' rights. There can be no climate justice without social justice. Thank you, Mr. Farski.
Dear colleagues, citizens want and need affordable and clean cars. This is a simple political reality that many, from politicians to car manufacturers, seem to be forgetting and ignoring. Where is the affordable version of the European electric car? Where is the new Volkswagen Beetle, an affordable electric car that will be able to compete with cheap Chinese imports? Europe should focus on innovation. Our workers and economy were left behind when companies moved their factories to China a few years ago to make a quick profit. They transferred their know-how there, and Chinese car makers have improved it. Now they are ahead of Europe in this regard. Under the current rules, which are in force since 2019, fleet emissions in Europe are set to be reduced starting next year. Nevertheless, there is a justified fear that European car manufacturers will not fulfill the limit and will have to pay a penalty. But disregarding the rules must not pay off. This is not just about making higher profits next year, it is about long-term commitment. Our society depends on following the rules. We don't need to bend the rules. We need a European affordable electric car. Without our own affordable cars, Europe will be flooded with cheap Chinese imports and will end up like Detroit did.
Grazie, onorevole Gori.
Thank you, Mr. Gori.
Signora Presidente.
President, Commissioner. The difficulties confronted by the automotive industry are of great concern to all of us. Of course, jobs and European industry in general are at stake here. Changing the targets for 2025, that's not what the what the companies want in this particular sector. The United States are moving much more quickly with renovation, using public resources as well for that purpose. So taking into consideration the competitive aspect of the market and the electric vehicle aspect as well, there has to be a new approach, taking into consideration the critical raw material necessary, of course, batteries and whatever is necessary in order to support electric vehicles. We need the necessary research. We have to take into consideration the overall trade landscape with China as well. What we're requesting is the Commission to move forward immediately with an automotive action plan, which will take into consideration everything that is out there in the automotive, if you like, ecosystem in order to move forward effectively. Thank you.
Vážený pane komisař.
Thank you. Commissioner, if anything should bring us all together, it is the fate of the European car industry. and tens of thousands of jobs that go with it. The European Commission is pushing for a 15% reduction in fleet emissions by 2025. However, what does that really get for us? Brussels dreams turn into real nightmares for our manufacturers. Infrastructure is insufficient, demand for electric cars is stagnating, and electric vehicles remain a luxury that most families, not only in the Czech Republic, can simply afford. Now tell me, how can car companies, including Škoda Auto, reduce emissions if they lack the basic conditions for success? We need a solution that will keep our engines running, not just environmentally, but also economically. Let's save our jobs, our factories. Let us keep our industrial heart beating. It is necessary to cancel the regulation for cars with traditional engines, and we have to get rid of these tendencies of the European Commission to order us what to do. So let's support plug-in hybrids and alternative fuels that could help reduce emissions even for our existing fleet. Let's be realistic. Let's support Green Deal that shouldn't become an ideology but should be more realistic. The European Union has already shown in the past that it can act reasonably by being flexible when solving problems in aviation or in agriculture. Why not now? Why do we not protect our own industry?
Thank you very much, colleague Malag.
President, Commissioner, members of the House. After the publication of the Draghi report on competitiveness, I think that we can really call this a crisis. And it covers many sectors, including the automotive sector. The author points out that the remedy should be to reduce labour costs, but that's going to have a very negative effect on workers and their families. Let's recall that the crisis also affects the rail sector, which is seeing decline. For example, the PKP cargo rail company in Germany, where we've had mass layoffs and social dialogue has been ignored, as has labour law. The Polish rail market is the second largest rail market in Europe, but these redundancies will still not guarantee the survival of the company. Indeed, if they do manage to turn things around, they still won't be competitive. Europe is an economic power. We can't just look to reducing labour costs as a solution. We can't bring in this destructive Green Deal. We need a strategy and we need investment. Negative restructuring processes should only be a last resort. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Colleague Tomac has the floor. Please respect the time limits.
Madam President, Mr. Vice President, this debate is necessary, first of all, because it has to do with a key economic sector. If we look at the numbers, over 14 million European citizens work in this sector. This is paramount. It's paramount that we support this industry, but the European Commission needs to give us some answers, because over-regulation, bureaucracy, and the lack of brave vision for this key sector can do a lot of harm to this industry. This is why it's very important that the Commission should put forward an ambitious plan to encourage this industry to be competitive and to be able to hold on to its jobs during this transition process. Thank you.
Grazie. Facoltà di intervenire l'onorevole Bloss. Prego.
Our next speaker is colleague Bloss. You have the floor. Thank you.
Herr Vorsitzender, Herr Kommissar, wir Grüne, wir wollen...
Commissioner, now, so that we want the people in the automobile industry to continue to work. But if we do that and not take into consideration the particular circumstances, it is a destructive situation that's developing. It's an industry which is based on combustion, not on e-cars. So the European industry, next to the Chinese industry, really has no chance under these particular circumstances. 1/3 of all German cars are sold in China, and every other car there is an e-car. The automobile industry is doing badly because too much in the direction of combustion and in the energy sector, and less in the direction of e-vehicles. The worldwide plan, if you like, for the next 10 years, or forecast, is that 10% of the German market will cover not only automotive, but aviation and other sectors as well. I'm sorry, but if it were e-fuels, then indeed much more would be saved, the sector would be greater, more jobs would be produced. So indeed, the worldwide sale of cars has increased by 25%. We are not succeeding under these particular circumstances. In order to save the automotive industry, we need technological clarity, innovation, a new policy that would lead towards e-mobility and would really put e-vehicles on the forefront. Thank you. Colleague Bellamy, please.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, President. What a surprise to hear the Greens presenting their condolences to the employees who are losing their jobs in the automotive sector. This is something that we've been hearing for years. The Socialists, Renew, and the extreme left, you've imposed these abhorrent standards on the EU automotive industry. Of course, Europe will have to come back to see reality, but it might be too late for the automotive sector. I said this 3 years ago, and I say it again. The car sector is 8% of GDP, 14%, 14 million jobs, and it also allows citizens to travel freely around the place. Now, of course, we need to decarbonise the car. Nobody is arguing against that. But let's take into account the global stakes and take into account Chinese competition. We've given them an extraordinary gift in giving them the technology on this area, which they already had a head start in. 250 billion has already been put on the table, and we're still showing that we aren't right in the face of the facts on the ground. Next year, European manufacturers faced with this crisis are going to have to pay 16 billion euro in fines. Why? Because Europeans aren't buying enough e-cars. We're sabotaging our own industry, and China is looking on enthusiastic and pleased, even though they're the biggest polluter in the world. So we need to stop this now, and we need to put these standards on the table and change them, because that's how to save not just the planet, but also our strategic autonomy and jobs.
Our next speaker is colleague Calfon. You have the floor, please.
Chers collègues,
Colleagues, European industry employs 3 million people directly and 14 indirectly. 180 factories are at risk in the short term. In Germany, Volkswagen is looking at closing 2 factories. 30,000 people are at risk. In Brussels, 3,000 Audi workers are at risk. In just a few years, the Chinese vehicle market has gone from 3 to 14%, whereas the European market has gone from 30 to 15%. If we're not careful, we're going to see the automotive sector facing the same sad fate as solar panel or telephone manufacturers. We need to focus on made in Europe. We need to have a Green Deal for climate. Transform the automotive sector by greening it. We support the Commission in taxing Chinese vehicles more. That's a first step. It's an investment plan looking at 800 billion euros. And through this transformation. Europe has to support workers who are at risk and provide better training for them, because there's no real project unless everyone can have a part in it.
Colleague Brilka.
President, Commissioner, the automotive industry is in a difficult situation. The low demand for e-cars is weakening the sector, which is pulling back from its plans to do away with combustion engines, which have been forced upon them by the EU. Economic conditions have got worse. The cost of production have increased, particularly due to the climate policy imposed by the EU Commission. The ban on selling combustion engines as of 2035 and forcing zero emissions on citizens is flying in the face of reality. European citizens don't want to buy e-cars despite the incentives. The radical electrification of transport, changing market conditions and competition from Asian competitors, particularly China, are leading us into this crisis. Tens of thousands of people across the EU are going to lose their jobs as a result. European innovation is now being exported beyond Europe, moved out of Europe. The industry, for example, that these industries are delocalized outside of the EU because of what you've done, because you keep increasing the costs for them to produce. The car industry is just one sector in which we've lost competitiveness. At the moment, decision makers in EU are not turning over these decisions, but they're driving us into the wall even more quickly. You should do away with this idea of imposing these standards and regulations on Europeans. But instead, the President of the Commission is maintaining the ban on the sale of combustion engines and the zero emissions in transport. The result is that China and America are innovating and we are regulating. And that's why we're lagging behind, because instead of developing, you are sabotaging us with this climate deal.
Colleague Vilvadini, please.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, President. Commissioner, colleagues. The crisis in the automotive sector is a reality. The failure of your green policies of the last 5 years has had one effect is high prices, closing plants and loss of jobs. Yes, we have to cut emissions, but not at the cost of competitiveness of a sector that makes up 7% of European GDP and provides jobs for 13 million people. We know that electric is not the solution. In 2017, Marchione said that without knowing how to provide energy from renewable clean sources, electric would be a threat to our planet. EU legislation has not just strengthened us on our way down that track, but has led to an economically poorer Europe and a Europe that is poorer in innovation, research and employment. Commissioner, the sector is asking for you to look at the state of play with technologies, the impact that they've had on the market and the environment, without waiting for the 2026 review. It's up to us as politicians to provide a response and to do so quickly. What we need to do is to see whether Europe is willing to listen or just to carry on down its green ideology route.
Sehr geehrte Frau
Vice President, Commissioner Dombrovskis, yes, indeed, we have a serious problem in the automotive industry in the European Union. Short term, already 100,000 jobs are being threatened. Who's guilty? Madam von der Leyen and Timmermans have set up this ban on combustible fuels. And now we have the situation on the market right now. Now, look at the way the Parliament has dealt with this. 15 500,000+ automobiles from English producers have been sold in the European Union, plus much more than that indeed. And we're speaking about 9 million and more. But when we look at these particular figures, one can't say that finally 15,600 cars are the cause of Volkswagen having the serious problem that it has right now. No, it's not that at all. It is von der Leyen and Timmermans who are to blame for this particular ban on these types of fuels, and also the CO2 levels that have been established as well. Now, look at these particular targets. Think very clearly whether these particular figures are logical. Look at the particular amounts that have been earmarked as well for as far as research and development, 15 billion. And when you take into consideration that Toyota look at their figures from Toyota, and then you can draw a really good lesson about the consequences of this particular policy that's been adopted. Thank you very much.
Dear colleagues, for the European car industry, the 15% reduction target for CO2 emissions by 2025 is not only achievable, it's essential. Lowering our ambition would be an epic failure, not only for the companies that have already embraced the challenges and achieved the resolutions, but also for our planet. We are facing a crisis that goes beyond numbers and target. It concerns the future of an industry that has, for generations, been the heart of our economy. There has been much talk about challenges facing European automotive sector, but often it concerns just specific parts of the German industry. If we start to waver now, if we allow ourselves to compromise, we will stop the progress we so desperately need. It would be an investment that support the expansion of electrical infrastructure, the installation of charging stations, and the development of e-fuels. When fines are collected next year, that money should go back into the economy to accelerate the green transition. It is our responsibility to ensure that Europe's car industry meets the goals we have set. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Colleague Mai has the floor. Who is that?
Beleid weer teruggaan, zoals sommigen hier voorstellen.
We need security for the industry and for also, of course, those that are supporting the industry, for the employers as well. We have to protect against competitiveness with China. It's simply too slow with the sustainable policy that's been adopted right now. We have to really speed up in the automotive sector as well. We're speaking now about 3,000 workers which have already lost their jobs, and many jobs in the future that will be threatened. Changes are absolutely necessary. And we need a total revisiting, a restructuring of the sector as well. Complete restructuring, actually. And we have to listen very carefully. We have to look. We have to observe. The research has to be conducted to see what sort of changes have to be made. We have to make sure that that change, that restructuring, is effective for those working in this industry, for the industry itself, in order to promote its sustainability in the future. Our next speaker is colleague Didier.
Chers collègues, enfin.
Colleagues, at last the European Commission is starting to worry about the automotive industry. All that wasted time that we could have used to stop closing the Aulnay-sous-Bois PSA factory or the Peugeot factory near Paris or others around Europe. So many workers would have liked the EU to support them before they lost their jobs. The Commission's declaration appears to be an admission of failure. The free change dogma has led to factories and jobs disappearing. All of this has happened with the EU behind them, and protectionism seems to be a rude word for them. Now the Commission shows concern as to the consequences of its own decisions, and it's imposing the use of e-vehicles on citizens without asking whether industry is ready to pick up this challenge given foreign competition. What's at stake here is not just about what the car of tomorrow will look like, but where it's going to be manufactured. We need to guarantee economic momentum which generates prosperity and jobs so that prosperity and independence can be maintained in Europe. We need to protect and support our industry, protect industry in the face of foreign competition and support factories, offering them conducive fiscal and regulatory environments in which to function.
Onorevole Zidlo.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is colleague Zidlo.
Thank you very much, President, Commissioner, members of the House. The car sector in the EU is dying. People are losing their jobs. The economics of it are in trouble. Now, this situation is the result of decisions taken in the EU over the last few years, the drafts and the proposals put forward by the Commission, adopted here in the Parliament. President van der Leyen has said that she's going to continue on this line. Industry is going to have more and more problems, and more people are going to lose their jobs. Who profits from that? The Chinese, who are delighted with the fact that they can get onto the EU market with their products. The alternative for Europeans is supposed to be the e-car, but people don't want to buy them, first of all, because they're very expensive. And even if they do choose them, they're choosing those that are not manufactured in the EU, but the ones manufactured in China because they're cheaper. Producers are saying that energy prices are too high in Europe and that they're having trouble with production costs in Europe. So Europeans have seen their freedom of choice taken away from them.
Colleague Gerbrandi, please.
Thank you, Madam President, Commissioner, dear colleagues. In 2023, the 5 biggest car manufacturers in Europe paid out almost 27 billion euros in shareholders' dividends and stock buybacks. 27 billion euros that could have been invested in the further development of the electric vehicle. Because let's face reality, tomorrow's car is electric, not hybrid, not e-fueled, and certainly not with a combustion engine. What we are currently witnessing is competition, and a competition that we lose. We are outsmarted by the Chinese and Tesla. Their cars are better, cheaper, more appealing, and as a free bonus, zero emission. We're not losing due to environmental policies, but because industry neglected the electric vehicle revolution, like Nokia did not see the iPhone coming. The European car industry is too big to fail, and what we need is a European public-private agreement to close the gap. Yes, also with public assistance, but only if the car manufacturers stop undermining the current policies and targets, because that is what is really endangering the future of our European car industry. Thank you.
Onorevole Jonski.
Our next speaker is colleague Jonski.
President, Commissioner, 14 million workers in the automotive sector have been waiting for this debate because they feel their jobs are under threat. In my country, 200,000 people produce 700,000 cars, and that represents 8% of GDP. But we all in this chamber know that there are serious problems facing the automotive sector. It's not just one Volkswagen factory in Germany who want to cut their workforce by 30,000. These problems go across. We've got delocalization with Volkswagen going to Turkey, Scania going to Serbia. Why have they left Europe? Because we're less competitive. We have wasted time. We've missed the moment when we needed to invest in the car industry. And we've also got massive imports from China. But there's another reason. Regulations are not realistic. I come from Poland. We've got 25 million cars on the road, combustion engine cars, 100,000 e-cars only in Poland. In my city, Lodz, which is the second largest city in Poland, I live in a part of town which is residential. 70,000 people live there. There are no e-cars. We don't even have the infrastructure to charge them. And people don't want to pay €150,000 for a car. People are wondering why the EU wants to ban them from driving the cars they already own. I'm a European. I'm in favour of modernity. I want to fight against smog. But I've always been in favour of common sense. We have to show intelligence, and that intelligence has to be leaving behind the idea of banning the production of internal combustion engines in 2035. Why? Because it's unrealistic unless somebody wants to destroy such an important industrial sector as this.
Okay.
Colleague Ecke, please.
Frau Präsidentin, Herr Kommissar, liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen.
Colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, we have a crisis right now. We all agree. Those who are not in agreement, the question is, how do we get there and how do we get out of this right now? Now, the various agreements concerning salaries, and this is one of the causes of the expense that exists right now. And I don't think that softening the goals set for 2035 is the best way either. We need planning properly and not constantly changing any sort of goals that have been set. We need smart, plannable timelines that will help us to be able to deal with the issue. And also, we have to be sufficiently ambitious as well and be able to deal with the various energy costs and the cost of any sort of transition. We also need to create that necessary demand for European automobiles, which is waning right now. I think we need progressive ideas and not exercising pressure, and any sort of ideological approach either is necessary.
Algunas veces pienso que la mayoría de...
Thank you, President. Sometimes I think that some of you are agents of the Chinese Communist Party, all of you who voted in favour of the Green Deal and the ban on the combustion engine in 2035. But now I see that you're hypocrites, because all of you, from here to there, are now voting, well, you voted in favour, and now you seem to be defending the car industry. This is an industry where we're world leaders, and now we're dependent on China, which produces 70% of batteries and controls the supply chain that is needed for the European industry. In Spain, the car industry employs 2 million people and is 10% of GDP. We also have Audi, Volkswagen, Renault. They're all closing factories and sending workers out into the street. In Spain, the most popular cars aren't more expensive than 14,000 euros. And yet what is happening now is we're making Europeans poorer. Is it freedom to swap your car for a public transport ticket? These are the common people who built the history of Europe, as we see in Madrid. They helped to build cities, and now in the cities they can't afford to buy these expensive, inefficient cars. Recently, Madame von der Leyen sent a letter asking for an impact assessment looking at this criminal regulation. 55% of you supported this. And the rest of you are probably going to go and buy a Chinese electric car. But this is not freedom. Thank you.
Colleague Crosetto. Thank you very much, President, Commissioner, colleagues. So the crisis of the automotive industry is under our scrutiny right now. But looking at the causes, I think it's important to analyze and look at the macroeconomic factors as well. Look at demand as well, which was mentioned. Now, producers do not want to relive the collapse that has existed in the recent past as well. They want to be able to find a new way. It's absolutely necessary to stabilize the sector. We've seen what's happened in Turin with the various producers in that particular area as well. So, of course, not being against sustainability, but not at the expense of the automobile as well. I think it's absolutely necessary to revisit the entire energy policy that it's, and also take into consideration the labor market perspective as well, the social consequences as well. On the 18th of October in Italy, there'll be a general strike, and the strike is not against the industry itself, but against the policies that have been adopted. So we have to look along the entire spectrum of the economy to see where the problems lies, and really not simply put all of our chips in policies like the new Green Deal, and electric autos, which will undermine entire sectors. Thank you.
Speaker, Mrs. Agrigoite Martinez. Sorry, maybe I made a bit mistake. I think.
Gracias, comisario.
Thank you, Commissioner, for setting out your vision of this strategic sector and for this European industry. As we've heard, it employs 40,000 people and represents 25% of the GDP in the Basque Country. And we are trying to move towards decarbonisation and encouraging supply chains. But Europe has to focus on research and advanced manufacturing, as we see in the Basque manufacturing tender, which has been set out for 2025. And this is a reference point for public-private cooperation. We have to strengthen and lay good basis for this sector, and also to ensure in-depth knowledge technology for the electric vehicles and processes throughout manufacturing. And so we have to focus on innovation and investment to strengthen manufacturing. We have to look at university startups, technological startups, and that will all help us to strengthen the European industry. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, Paulus Saudargas, 1 minute and a half.
President, Commissioner, dear colleagues, after the resurrection from COVID, the automotive industry of Europe faces new big challenges. And this is really painful, because we were always leading industry in the world. Dear colleagues, if I would ask you to close your eyes and imagine a car of your dreams, I'm sure that most of you would imagine the European brand. There are many obstacles. Commissioner Dombrovskis mentioned energy prices, labour market and raw materials. But I think there are more. It's first of all China's technological invasion. But what bothers me most, the enormously high sustainability targets. The global warming is a major problem, but we cannot solve it alone. We have to have America, Asia, Africa on board. And here I would like to address one paradox. We are quite innovative and leading in some green solutions, wind power, hydropower, hydrogen technologies and other, except solar. But we ourselves are in much greater demand of these products because of the goals than the rest of the world. Hence, once again, we are consumers and not the producers. We massively import solar panels and Chinese electric cars. We trapped ourselves in an economic greenhouse, more import than export. Dear colleagues, we can deal with China only if we stand united. The approach towards Chinese electric cars should be unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, Ross Serrano Sierra, 1 minute.
Presidente.
President, 600 workers have lost their job in one of the plants in Spain. This is of great concern and illustrates the situation throughout Europe. The situation in Aragon, we're speaking about 30% of industry there and a huge sector of exports as well. We need transition in the sector locally and throughout Europe to deal with challenges like sustainability, environmental circumstances taken into consideration, and to be competitive. Social justice and environmental justice, climate justice has to be taken into consideration as well. We need a European action plan to transform the sector with a clear social plan which involves special measures to protect jobs, to support employment and training, so that the workers in the sector in Aragon and elsewhere can continue to use their talent in order to contribute to this transformation. This will be more just for all. Thank you.
Sebastian Kroes.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, Sebastian Kroes, 1 minute and a half.
Voorzitter, we hebben het vandaag over de Europese auto-industrie.
President, we're talking about the European car industry and the crisis it's facing. Now, on Friday, we heard that there would be import duties on Chinese electric cars. Now, we have to fight against unfair competition, whatever country it comes from. But how did we get to this situation? Situation in which the EU car industry and the whole industry is in decline and that our competitiveness is falling. We're being laughed at around the world. Why? Because of all of the flood of rules and the Green Deal that we can't pay for that's being forced on us. Automatic braking systems, speed limits, emission rules, and so on. The regulation machine is running at full speed. Now everyone has to buy an e-car, but we can't afford them. And that's why the car industry is falling apart. Who could have imagined this happening? Well, we're pointing at the red communist in China. But what about the green communists in this room? They're living in their CO2 bubble, and their virtue signalling is destroying EU industry. So let's challenge Chinese unfair competition, but let's also lighten the burden on EU industry. Particularly, the CO2 emissions rules have to be reduced.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, Ondřej Krotilek, 1 minute.
Vážený pane předsedající, vážený pane komisaři.
President, Commissioner, the European car industry is facing a crisis. We know this. But could we have not avoided this debate? Let's look how we got here. The outgoing Commission, applauded by the Socialists and the Green, has been systematically tightening the screws. Everything was bet on the electric. The car industry must deal with increasingly complex and unpredictable regulation and unrealistic emission requirements. We can no longer pretend that we can keep driving against the wall. The car industry in Europe has more than 100 years of tradition and employs millions of people. We have to stop and reassess the direction we're going. The Commission should act immediately. We know that the car manufacturers cannot meet the CO2 emission requirements, and the impending fines are simply not fair. We must review legislation. We must give room to different ways towards decarbonization. Otherwise, everything will end up badly at the detriment of the car industry.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, Ivan Verhofstadt. He's going to be speaking from his own place. 1 minute.
Sorry, just a moment, micro.
No problem.
Okay.
Do you hear me? Thank you, Mr. President. Une expression dit qu'un âne ne...
We hear that lightning doesn't strike twice. Tariff barriers, industrial strategy. Europe has had this debate a number of times. For example, when we talked about solar panels in 2013, but by the selfishness and lack of vision of some countries, we haven't been able to or haven't wanted to implement a proper European strategy. The result is that only 30% of solar panels that are installed in Europe are manufactured here. Today, 4,000 workers in Audi Brussels are the victim of this arrogance and lack of strategic vision in the automotive sector. In 10 years, our trade deficit with China has tripled, and France has become a net importer economically. This has to stop. It's a question of our credibility, even democracy, I would say. Because instead of leaving ground to the extremes who just want to see us getting further and further behind the United States and China, we have to avoid going back to the past. We have to be clear. Tariff rules are not the solution, but they can help us to re-establish fairer competition and to win some time to adopt a strategic vision.
Next speaker, Angelika Niebler, for 1.5 minutes.
Vielen Dank, Herr Präsident.
Thank you very much, President. Vice President of the Commission, members of the House. 13 million people work in the automotive sector. In Germany, where I come from, it's 780,000 people. We are the continent of the car. The car industry and the parts industry is one of the core elements of our economy. And I want that to remain the case. I want the jobs in the car industry and the parts supplying industry to remain. I want the industry to direct itself towards climate neutrality. I want the transition. Global competition has become greater. Unfair methods are being used. So we have to look at what's good for our businesses, what's good for our factories, what's going to keep the jobs here, and what doesn't. That's the benchmark that we must act according to. Import duties and penalties are not the right answer, I don't think. What I'm seeing in my home region is that the car industry is changing towards sustainability. The review of the CO2 threshold values directive needs to be brought forward to 2025. We need to look at the fleet threshold values, and we need a life cycle analysis, and we need technological neutrality. We need to correct the combustion engine and create alternative fuels, because that's the only way that the 40 million existing cars on the road in Germany and in the rest of Europe can leave a smaller environmental footprint. We need fairer competition around the world, and I think it's right that the Commission is threatening penalty duties, but I hope that through negotiation we can use that pressure to step back from actually implying the penalty duties, because that should be a last resort.
Speaker, Vice President Christel Schaldemose.
Tusind tak, Herr Formand, Kommissær.
Thank you very much, Chair, Commissioner. As you can hear today, there's no doubt that the European automotive industry is under pressure. Partly because there is strong unfair competition from China. But I must say that the pressure also comes from the car industry itself, because they haven't dreamt the same dream of transition. If they hadn't hindered us in putting up these many demands we've put on the sector for the past few years, we wouldn't be here today. We shouldn't turn back the green transition. We shouldn't prolong the use of the combustion engine. We need to invest so we get better at producing batteries and can produce better, cheaper electrical cars. The future is not in combustion engines in Europe. It is to produce new cars, and if we do that together, we can secure the future of the European car industry, but they need to take part.
Marie Doshi, Kunze, 1 minute.
Thank you. Next speaker, Marie Doshi, 1 minute.
Colleagues, I'm happy to see that the EU is at last looking at the crisis of its own making. Better late than never, but let's be clear. Cars and everything else, the EU is just repairing damage that it inflicted itself, bringing our economy to its knees and our industry to the edge of the precipice. Look at Audi Brussels, the 3,000 jobs that are the victim of your policies, victim of your fanatic devotion to free change. You invited Eastern European, Korean and Chinese manufacturers to compete on an uneven playing field. So our manufacturers had no chance. And then the coup de grace. You forced our manufacturers to follow your obsession with the e-car. Even Renault said, your targets are crazy. That 36% change is not going to change anything in competing with China. You're protecting the problems that you are responsible for yourselves.
Paldies.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, Pietro Fiocchi. 1 minute.
Buongiorno a tutti. I miei colleghi hanno già...
Good morning. Now, my colleagues have said everything basically, but I'd like to remind all that this is only a little teeny piece of the mosaic. The distribution system, the electricity distribution system, and the numerous different micro producers, and we're speaking about who is paying in this distribution system. Services as well, gas stations as well, hundreds of thousands. Who are going to pay for these services or cover their particular needs? And 100% renewables. We also have to use carbon in order to generate electricity. Those who don't know that are simply foolish. So what is going to happen to these 200 or 100 or 200 possible nuclear power stations that might have to be built in the future to deal with this? Who is going to...
Thank you very much. Next speaker.
President, Commissioner, members of the House, the auto sector and the Polish automotive boom has been something we've been proud of in the past. But now we're talking about factories closing down and workers being fired. 500 workers losing their job in Stellantis, in Gliwice in Poland is the latest bit of news. And we're all shocked by this. Now, the reasons for this are many. EU regulation could always be improved. But I would look for the causes to this situation in the short-sightedness and the lack of vision in the big automotive companies. The Dieselgate scandal, in which consumers were cheated, was a big warning for the sector. However, the lessons were not learned from that scandal. Now, I don't want to point fingers today. Jobs are threatened, competitiveness in Europe, and it's a question of all hands on deck. I want new proposals from the new Commission. Penalty duties on e-cars from China is unfortunately the right move, but it's not going far enough. We also need to look at facilitating consolidation in the automotive sector in Europe before it's too late.
Next speaker, Mr. Wouter Beke, 1 minute and a half.
Dank u wel, voorzitter, meneer de vicevoorzitter.
Thank you, President, Vice President of the Commission. Audi Brussels is closed its doors 7 or 8 years ago, and I was looking at this because I was looking at the future of Audi in Brussels. It was apparently a very good plant, focused on future needs, suitable for the future, but now we're seeing that the factory is closing its doors. And this is the paradox, because this is where Audi built its first electric vehicles. CO2 emissions objectives that have to be reached by 2025. That's a date that's approaching very quickly. And these objectives simply won't be possible. So, Vice President, what we need are not sanctions, but encouragement. And that's, however, what you're doing, looking at putting billions worth of sanctions on business who are trying to change, is not what we should be doing. We should be trying to help them to adapt and to help businesses so that they can be successful in the transition. And yet, this isn't the case. So what should we do? Well, we have to focus on cheaper electric vehicles. We have to ensure that we have charging infrastructure, which is insufficient at the moment. And we also have to diversify the supply chain. These are all key. But there are other points as well. New batteries, for example. In Leuven, just next to Brussels, there is a business that is manufacturing the batteries of the future. So how can we do that together? We have to do that by encouraging and stimulating enthusiasm, not a fear of sanctions.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, Bruno Tabak.
President, Commissioner, colleagues, let's be very clear what crisis we are actually talking about here today in this debate. Because European car manufacturers have, last years, followed a very deliberate strategy of building fewer but more expensive cars. And it has created record profits for all of them in the past years. But it has come at an obvious cost for their workers and for European consumers. European consumers who will now pay again when otherwise justifiable import tariffs on Chinese cars will make affordable cars that are available actually more expensive. They will pay for the very lucrative dead end in which our car industry has maneuvered itself. And while industry in the rest of the world is racing ahead, some in this Parliament now want the EU to slow down even more, hoping in vain that time can be stopped while we revise our directives and hang on to the past. Well, colleagues, Europe already has more than enough very beautiful museums where we preserve the past. The industrial deal that we need is one that builds a sustainable future, and quickly, because if we keep turning in circles, museums will soon be all that we have left.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, Jolie Rechagnon.
Monsieur le Président, mes chers
President, colleagues, we meet here in the European Parliament to debate the crisis and the future of the automotive sector. In the same Parliament that followed the Commission's orders and condemned the industry at the altar of environmentalist ideology. Sales have stagnated since COVID, but e-car sales are also dropping. So, against this backdrop, we're trying to stop the sale of combustion engines by 2035. Trying to decarbonise the economy, the Commission is maintaining financial sanctions on manufacturers who can be fined up to a total of 15 billion. Are we taking the mickey? Is this craziness or is it cynical? The situation is serious and we need to find reason once again and come back to reality.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Next speaker, Stefano Capendagna, 1 minute.
President, colleagues, it's not necessary, it's not sufficient to look at the particular data from the automotive sector, which is we have a drop in production, which is dramatic, terrible harm to the economy as well. We're speaking about 13 million workers on our continent that are working in the sector. And I'm speaking to the left of this chamber as well. The ban on combustion engines by 2025, that is going to lead to terrible consequences as far as the labor market is concerned. The ECR delegation, well, we all want for this particular regulation on emissions, we want it to be modified, and we want to make our sector a productive one. We wanted to make it a kind of flagship of the European industry overall, protecting jobs. This is something which apparently the left hasn't taken into consideration or doesn't want. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, Miriam Lexman.
Thank you for the floor, Mr. Commissioner, Chairman, colleagues. The situation of the car industry in Europe is more than worrying. Even more threatening, however, its impact on people's livelihood and our economic security. The car industry is the driving force of the Slovak economy. Up to 250,000 people work in these sectors. I think that the ban of the combustion engine is a big mistake. I did not support this in the vote, and today I demand a revision. It is important to have ambitious green goals, but they must be realistic, and mainly they must not be at the expense of our industry and our economy. Due to our bad decisions, what we see today is the Chinese electric vehicles are flooding our markets. I believe that the deepening dependence on China is one of the biggest risks, as we see Chinese investments have proven to be very problematic in all the countries where they've taken place. And that is why, from the beginning, I've always warned of possible risks in the way how the Slovak government is seeing possible Chinese investments. One example is the battery factory in Šurany. So I ask again, does the Slovak government really consider the needs of the Slovak car industry, or do these investments serve somebody else's interests? It's high time for the EU institutions and governments to stop gambling on our economic security and focus instead on the creation of real economic goods that serve our people. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, Daniel Latar. 1 minute.
Colleghi.
Thank you very much, colleagues. I'm not going to speak about the crisis. I'm not going to speak about shutting factories or competition with China. I'm going to talk about emissions where we should remain competitive, where we have the means, the possibility of producing an innovative and inclusive future. In my humble opinion, I think we should look further than our reactive measures and address the roots of the problem, the structural imbalance. The expenses of our production are what they are. In order to compete, we must invest in technologies and manufacturing processes which are advanced and which can cope with the costs without compromising on the social situation. The market remains what it is, and therefore we must take care not to fall into the trap of protectionism. Instead, we must promote equitable and just competition by going out of this room and looking at how we shall work on global and international standards. We must adapt. We have no other solution. We must adapt in order to be saved. We must be flexible, and not only by being a regulator, but also being a sustainer, supporting. If we do this, I think we can save existing jobs, but also generate more work for future generations.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, Angelina Ferrer. 1 minute.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, President. If we look at the catastrophic industrial policy, we can see that under your era we have seen everything: digitalization of Europe, offshoring manufacturing to developing countries, and now you're deleting the automotive sector. By 2035, all new cars have to be electric, with a risk of the disappearance of a number of our industrial producers on the continent. Renault, for example, has sounded the alarm about thousands of jobs being at risk, for example, in Valeo, in Sarthe, or where plants will be closing. Over 250 workers will lose their jobs. So my question is simple. What are you going to do about these huge layoffs and plant closures? And will they ever cause you to question your degrowth policies? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, Anna Zalewska. 1 minute.
Panie Przewodniczący.
President, Commissioner, to be frank, I was blown away by what you said. I thought you were joking, Commissioner. You've come to the European Parliament to talk about a crisis in the car sector, and you say that it's not an issue. Are you not seeing the car plants closing down, the jobs being lost, the problems with batteries? Batteries are made up of components that aren't available in Europe, that we are dependent on China for these components. China has laid our car industry low. So where is good sense? you citizens want real solutions. You know that every document in the packet for Fit for 55 was met with applause in China. They are now able to win over the EU market. Are we going to go to the Azerbaijan COP meeting, trying to load up the green turbo even more? People are laughing at us. Let's change tack for the good of Europeans.
Thank you. Next speaker, Esther Lakos, 1 minute and a half.
Mr. President, Commissioner, dear colleagues, electric vehicles offer an opportunity for the automotive industry to ensure Europe's leading position in innovation. However, Chinese competition poses a new challenge. While Europe should remain open to fair competition with China, the green transition must not increase our geopolitical exposure. The Hungarian government, a proud defender of national sovereignty, gives preference to Chinese automotive investors over European ones. These Chinese car factories often mean substandard working conditions, employ not local but Asian workers, and also mean an extreme environmental load. These so-called green site investments use very valuable agricultural land, which is also not beneficial to Hungarian farmers. The new BYD plant in Hungary opens a way to circumvent European tariffs on EVs. This policy, despite the hundreds of millions of forints in subsidies, has failed. Car battery production fell by 32% from mid-23 to mid-24. Instead of polluting Chinese car plants, we should support value-added investments and create quality jobs. I ask the Commission to keep a closer eye on environmental rules, that they are being respected. This can ensure sustainable development for Europe and Hungary. Thank you.
The next speaker is Thomas Pellerin-Carlin. 1 minute.
Monsieur le Président.
President, Commissioner, colleagues. The European automotive sector is experiencing a profound transformation. For 20 years, manufacturers have focused on making big cars that are very expensive. That has to stop. Our industry has to go back to what made it strong in the first place, producing cheap, small cars for the European middle classes. Today, we're switching to electric vehicles, and we're trying to do that as quickly as possible to try to push our citizens to fight climate change. We're trying to, in order to defend workers from Chinese competition, in order to support workers, particularly those in rural areas where cars are essential. Now more than ever, it's our duty to develop a European industrial policy, one that will ensure we can produce light, affordable electrical vehicles in car. Together, we can help the European automotive sector find greatness once again.
Anne-Sophie.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, Anne-Sophie Frigo. 1 minute.
Chers collègues.
Colleagues, the situation in the car industry is a perfect example of political incompetence, with targets picked at random and standards that haven't been preceded by impact analysis. Then the ban on combustion engines as of 2035 is going to be a social and industrial disaster. A disaster because you're going to stop people driving who don't have enough money to buy electric cars. There'll be nothing left to decarbonise if you impose this on the car industry. You have rolled out a red carpet to Chinese manufacturers. Your ideological certainty means that you haven't heard European industry crying alarm, and you've undermined the major industries. So let's invest in research, help European manufacturers, be up to the task. There is time to get out of this situation, but withdraw from the ban on combustion engines.
Claudio Ricci.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, Claudio Richard Tarziu. 1 minute.
Stimați colegi.
Dear colleagues, this obsession to save the planet from bureaucrats banning internal combustion engines is a utopia, a dangerous utopia, and its consequences are becoming more and more real. Because of these irrational, impossible to attain objectives, the car industry is on the brink of failure. The threshold imposed by the Commission for the reduction of CO2 emissions is simply absurd, and it will lead to the collapse of manufacturers. Some people's ambition to give up on these combustion engines in favor of e-cars is devoid of reason and dangerous. This electrification will not save humankind. On the contrary, it will bring us to ruin. Thank you.
Yes, Sophia. Sorry.
Thank you very much.
I do apologize. Would you like to take a blue card? Sorry, it was in the last moment arrived a blue card from Nicola Stefanuta. But please come back, then, in that case. Maybe wait for translation, yeah, or they don't need. They are both on one.
Domnule Târziu.
Mr. Târziu, I listened to your speech, and I believe that you traveled in Bucharest. Did you walk in Bucharest? Did you breathe the air in Bucharest? Did you talk to the NASA Institute to find out just how many cases of lung cancer we have in Bucharest because of the pollution? You have children. Have you talked to your children about what the future means in terms of our mobility? Do you know that children want a pollution-free future? And last but not least, do you know that the car industry wants this transformation, not necessarily in terms of electrification, but they want everything but fossil fuels for the next generation?
Mulțumesc pentru întrebare.
Thank you for this question. I didn't expect anything else from the left. I didn't expect any other approach. This is an ideological approach devoid of any contact with reality. If you think that this transition from internal combustion engine cars to electric vehicles is good for humankind, is good for the industry, for economies, you are dead wrong. It's impossible anyway, because we've seen how these electric cars work. They break down in the middle of the road. And whatever the European Union is doing is not helpful in reducing, in cutting down emissions.
I appreciate you are happy with this debate, not maybe happy, but you received some view. Thank you. Next speaker, Sophia Kircher, for 1.5 minutes.
Sehr geehrter Herr Präsident, Herr Vizepräsident der Europäischen Kommission.
President, Vice President of the Commission, colleagues. First of all, it's wonderful to be able to stand here before the plenary to speak about something which is moving for all of us. Traffic, mobility, also responsible for CO2 emissions. But to solve the problem through our producers and the supply and influencing the supply chain and how it works may not be the way. And also forbidding combustion fuels as well. Is that the best way? Also, let's not forget that it is causing great harm to the automotive sector. We need a change in approach as well. We have to look at the possibility of transferring road traffic to rail traffic cargo, that is to say, and also look at the technology out there, innovation, and also clean fuels, and not forbidding fuels or banning them. And also, we have to take a look at the possibilities that exist as far as funding and proper taxation system.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, Annalisa Corrado, 1 minute.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, President. In just 3 years, China has become the world's leading exporter of cars. 70% of these are in combustion engine cars. If we only look at what's happening in light of electronic cars, then we'll make a mistake. The European industrial crisis is coming from all over. Today, the only way forward for our industry is to focus on excellence and innovation, one that puts decarbonisation at its heart. And this is not just in the electric car sector, but the entire mobility sector, with new infrastructures, electrification, and new means of public transport. This is how we can both protect jobs and ensure that we can keep and attract new talents. To do this, we need a common strategy, we need common investments, and to look at cost of energies and the still high cost of gas. Everything is changing, but conservatism and austerity in economics are wrong choices. We need a stable support which will clear in objectives. We need to ensure that one technology does not establish itself over all the others. Otherwise, it becomes merely dogma. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, Jaak Madison, 1 minute.
Paldies. Dear Mr. Dombrovskis, first of all, as we know, it's children. And definitely the Green Deal is a revolution, as we have seen. It's a very revolutionary to ban all the traditional cars by 2035, and now we're going to see the results. It will be like chaos for 14 million of people who are working in the sector. The automotive sector is about 8% of the EU's GDP. It's huge, and now it will be destroyed. But when I was following the debate, I heard very many times by the MEPs from the EPP group that we have to turn around this terrible law, this ideology. And as we know very well, the new old president of the Commission, Ms. von der Leyen, she's coming from the EPP. So the vice president is at least here. So very probably he can ask from Madame von der Leyen that what is the plan for von der Leyen? Is she going to do what the EPP promised before the elections, to get all the votes, to win the elections? Is she really doing what they promised before the elections and to turn around this terrible law and to continue with our strong economy and to use also in the future our normal traditional cars, what you can use also in the winter during the cold period? Please, yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, Juan Ignacio Zoido Alvarez, for 1 minute.
Gracias, Presidente. Thank you very much, President. Thank you, Commissioner. The European Commission has established these particular taxes for Chinese vehicles in order to put an end to the illegal subsidies which are threatening the automotive industry in Europe. This particular sector, which employs 13+ million individuals. But let's not forget that European industry also depends on international trade. And we have to take into consideration that 50% taxation on European vehicles, and then we have the 20% on Chinese vehicles, the 10% on American vehicles. Well, quite clearly, our sector is very vulnerable under these particular circumstances. So I think we have to really work in order to be able to avoid the blackmail that's out there undermining our industry with dumping. The Commission is responsible to protect a sector which provides to the entire world without unfair competition and, of course, maintaining the highest quality standard-wise. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, Andreas Schieder, 1 minute.
Colleagues, this policy that we've had over the last few years is now turning around to bite us. This is just not a current crisis, but the US and China have been overtaking Europe for years. They invest more and they pump more public money into their industry. If we don't wind back now, we're going to lose value added. It's going to threaten jobs and our prosperity is going to be undermined. We need investment in future technologies and in infrastructure, where we haven't done enough over the last few years. Look at the e-charging station debacle, for example. There's a real gap here in Europe. We need a pact to create jobs and innovation. So Europe's first strategy has to be bedded down so that European manufacturers have an advantage in open tender. We need more investment in European infrastructure, in European industry. We have to fight for that.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, Matej Tonin, 1 minute.
Dear Commissioner, dear colleagues, we do not need new restrictions, new bans in the automotive industry. We need new innovations. After all, our industry does not need new sanctions and punishment. The European ban on new internal combustion engines after 2035 has been a huge mistake, really a tremendous mistake, almost insanity. The European Union has been a superpower when it comes to classical vehicles. So why do we want to ban our source of power? Why do we want to just follow the United States and China? So I'm really asking myself, why are we so short-sighted? Why are we destroying our own economy? Also, vehicles are not the biggest polluters. We have other polluters that need to be addressed. That's why I really expect that these bans will be actually overturned. We need more support to our industry with less red tape and more financial support.
Next speaker, Idoia Mendia, for 1 minute, please.
Señor comisario.
Commissioner.
Región Euskadi, donde el sector de la automoción emplea a más de 40.000 personas, cifra que refleja la importancia que tiene este sector. Estamos en un momento decisivo para la industria europea que necesita fondos específicos para su transformación y un plan ambicioso a escala europea. Europa ha demostrado recientemente que cuando actuamos unidos somos más fuertes y superamos todas las dificultades. Por eso necesitamos controlar toda la cadena de valor del vehículo eléctrico y consolidar la infraestructura de recarga apostando por la innovación y la formación. Sin ello, Europa no podrá liderar la transformación hacia una economía verde y digital. El Fondo de Transición Justa debería ampliarse y reforzarse también el diálogo social para ofrecer a nuestra ciudadanía las herramientas necesarias para el skilling y el upskilling, como hemos hecho en mi región, en Euskadi. Con esta estrategia cumpliremos un doble objetivo: preparar a los trabajadores para los nuevos empleos verdes y, por otro lado, hacer mucho más competitivas y productivas nuestras empresas europeas. Lo que está en juego es nuestro futuro y el futuro de los empleos industriales en Europa. Gracias.
Thank you, colleagues. So, I would like to open now catch the eye procedure. And I have a very long list, and sorry to I'm not able to give, it's almost 20 people. I will give some priority for those who were present most of the time, as I was consulting during the debate, which is almost, I think, more than 3 hours now. and also geographical balance and, of course, political balance. I will do my best, but some of you will not get the floor who are registered for KGI. First speaker on the KGI is Sunčana Glavak. Floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, dear Mr. Commissioner. I believe you heard, I will wait for you. I believe you've heard the word innovation mentioned several times today, and that you've heard that in order to protect jobs and to retain the global leadership of Europe, we need to give priority to innovation instead of restrictive regulation. Digitalization and new technologies need to be catalysts of change and a chance to enhance our competitiveness. Let me just remind you of the situation today. The average age of vehicles is 12 years, in lesser developed countries 15 to 17 years, and we also need to consider different economical and social situations within the EU. So development of e-vehicles is good, but still we are lacking sufficient infrastructure on the territory of the EU. We also do not have the same possibilities throughout the EU for purchasing e-vehicles, which are still too costly. And yes, we will be able to retain jobs and we will be able to slowly enter the green transition in this way, but taking into consideration all the real conditions. Thank you.
Maria Grappini.
Mr. President, Commissioner, I think you agree with me when I say that an economy without an industry is devoid of a future. And you've been given a portfolio on the economy. Commissioner, I believe that when a decision is taken and deadlines are given for an industry such as the car industry, it's very important industry with over 14 million jobs and a positive balance. When a deadline is given, you need an impact assessment, but not the way you're doing it by asking, by interviewing 100 people. The car industry is very important. Therefore, we need to think about how we can help this industry to reach these objectives. Commissioner, it's not enough to just throw money at it. Of course, we need money, but we also need time. So I was part of the industry for 36 years. So there's nothing wrong with winding back on our deadlines if we're bankrupting our industry. And we should have a First Europe slogan, just like the US.
Thank you. Next speaker, Silvia Sardone.
L'obbligo dal 2035 del
225 and that e-car approach, it is totally myopic in my view, which will lead the automotive industry to a terrible crisis. In 2023, the plants that closed 13% more than the previous year. So a terrible situation. And sales are increasing at the same time of cars. So what the poor, the poverty-stricken workers, nobody's taking them into consideration as well. We're speaking about 13 million workers in the sector. And 750,000 jobs right now are being put at stake. Why? All of this for the new Green Deal. Look at what the Chinese are doing and what they're doing in order to compete. And our green situation has created a situation which is totally ridiculous. Really, congratulations. My compliments to those that are undermining the industry.
Dziękuję, panie przewodniczący.
Thank you, President. Members. We've got incredible hypocrisy going on here. The centre and the left got us into this situation in which the car industry is not competitive and isn't making a profit. More regulation, more burden on industry. And so, of course, we're not competitive. And now you dare to criticize your own policies. It's because of that we're losing competitive battle with the US and China. We need to stop creating new regulation and directive. Innovation comes through creativity in business. But if they're weighed down with regulation and tax, then they have no chance of competing with the US or the Chinese economies. That's obvious. If we want e-mobility, then it has to be modern and not forced to its knees by the bureaucrats.
The next speaker, Benoit Cassar.
Monsieur le Président, Monsieur le Commissaire.
President, Commissioner, colleagues, I welcome the Commission's approach, which is looking towards fair competition and trying to protect our automotive industry. It needs protection, as we see in Belgium with the tragic Audi situation. I hope that this will be a historic point, the end of naive Europe. However, I would draw your attention to a couple of points. One, we've heard the announcement of tariffs on Chinese products. If that is to have an impact on European agricultural products, then we're going to have to provide for compensatory measures for any companies that are hit. Secondly, if Europe's trying to face up to Chinese subsidies, we also have to ensure that we can protect European agriculture in light of unfair competition from Mercosur. How are we going to get a message to Mercosur without a mirror clause? European farmers are victims of free trade from the West and the victims of protectionism on the East. We want to see consistency, please.
Next speaker, Mark Botenga.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, President. In my country, in my hometown, Brussels, Audi may well shut up shop, risking thousands of highly qualified, well-trained jobs. Those workers, some people are saying they're victims of China, victims of the Green Deal, but basically they're the victims of a lack of industrial strategy. We've allowed manufacturers and Audi to say we want to build big cars because we can make a bigger profit margin on them rather than investing in affordable cars. Workers have said to me that in the past they all drove cars made by their own car plant, but that's impossible these days. So what we need is a moratorium on the closure of car plants because we need them for the transition. We have to impose maintaining jobs and force manufacturers to manufacture cars that people can actually afford. There needs to be a lot of public money invested in infrastructure because, of course, otherwise there will be no competitive industry of any type in Europe.
Next speaker, Marcin Sivniewski.
Ladies and gentlemen, the problems facing the car sector is not a crisis, it's the result of the crazy climate policy the EU has imposed, battling as they do the internal combustion engine. The car sector has to change production more quickly than it would normally do under market influence. You're hypocrites. If Chinese e-cars, which met your high requirements, were available, then you would put duties on them to stop people from buying them. What's the point of that? Either you're bluffing with the environment, or you just hate drivers and you want them to do away with cars. Or alternatively, you want the consumer to be prosperous. So protect European producers, because under the weight of your regulation, they are going bankrupt because they're too expensive. No to penalty duties, but we should make life easier for European manufacturers, reduce labour costs and energy costs, and, of course, throw out the Green Deal straight into the bin.
Speaker Katarzyna Konieczna.
Pane předsedo, kolegyně.
Thank you, Chair. Dear colleagues, we have heard many things today. The crisis of the car-making industry, Euro 6, the need to reform Euro 6, the need to reform the ban of combustible engines.
Euro 7 and others. But this was not only approved by socialists, the left or Greens, it was also approved by the European right-wing parties who, together with the European Commission, try to make sure these rules will be valid here. And we were already saying back then that this will result in the destruction of the European car-making industry. At that time, you were laughing at us. However, many of those people are no longer sitting here and they are not accountable. They held no responsibility for this. Yes, we destroyed our industry. We destroyed European car makers. And somebody said here that employees should not be the victim of managers. And in the same way, the European industry should not be the victim of the wrong decisions taken by the European Parliament. The only thing to do is now to automatically deregulate this sector. So make sure to do it. Thank you.
Radan Kanev first.
Thank you, Chair. I was speaking in Bulgarian. Уважаеми колеги,
colleagues, during this debate, we heard the argument that we lag behind China and the United States in the electric cars technologies in all of their aspects. However, what we didn't hear in this debate is a very simple fact. The United States of America, the China, and I would like to add here Korea, which is also way ahead of us, have not banned internal combustion engines. They achieved their successes not by banning certain technologies, but by encouraging more modern and cleaner technologies. Obviously, we are lacking something. Logically, we can see that we do not lack in administrative bans. We lack in innovation. We lack in incentives. We lack in incentives for advancement of technologies. I would like to highlight in conclusion that Europe is the leader in internal combustion engines. That is why we have to heavily invest in solutions for new alternative fuels. Thank you.
Next speaker, Elena Sancho Murillo.
Gracias. El sector automovilístico.
Thank you. In order to be able to adopt the cost of energy, salaries, and other conditions, other situations in the world pose a number of problems as far as competitiveness. And these problems have to be dealt with in the European market. It's important for the Commission to develop an industrial policy which allows the sector to deal with the environmental issues on the horizon and also protects the social pillar, creates jobs, sustainable jobs furthermore. We have to be able to adapt. And this not only to protect the existing jobs, providing, in other words, retraining and re-education, but also deploying new technologies to make the sector more viable and sustainable. The climate situation is a challenge. It will help us to develop policies to deal with the various issues that exist on the forefront, impediments, overcome them in order to be able to deal with the transition and execute it effectively.
Speaker Dario Tamburano.
Colleagues, this crisis, and not just in industry, is the consequence of the fact that for years now we have favoured industrial delocation and know-how relocation, particularly in strategic sectors such as batteries. I think it's right to move towards electrification and diversification. However, the objectives of the Green Deal are not necessarily followed up by the necessary financial and economic policies. While the sector is galloping ahead in the USA, thanks to support in China, thanks to state aid, we are at risk. We are against reviewing deadlines that have already been set, but what we do want to see are tax credits and lower interest rates and more basic electric cars without unnecessary extras. Just an engine, a battery, and 4 wheels, not too many gadgets. So they have to be affordable for ordinary people. Thank you.
Katarina Rotnevedjalova. Micro.
Okay, once again. Pán predseda, ďakujem veľmi pekne.
Thank you for the floor. People buy a car because they need.
Благодаря.
Информácia o aute je samozrejme jeho cena. Takže cenová dostupnosť aut pri...
So, the price is the most important question when you buy a car. So this Parliament, through its decisions and the Green Deal and impossible aspects and regulations, we have come to the situation which we face now. I do hope that the Commission will also speak about the impact of these kinds of decisions, how these kinds of decisions may impact on the people in general. Yes, we have decided that we would only focus on using electric vehicles only, and this is what we have come to. Now the question is, there are certain ideas mentioned here by the colleagues, let's say alternative fuels or hybrid cars, but let us not only speak about electric vehicles. Thank you.
Speaker is Elżbieta Katarzyna Lukacijewska.
President, I want to ask a question. In whose interest is it to destroy the car sector in Europe, one of the main pillars of the EU economy? People are being sacked. If they don't have a job, then the last thing they're going to be worried about is the environment. Let's realise that. E-cars are too expensive for most consumers and they're inefficient. Transformation has to tie in with what the sector can do because there are thousands of jobs at stake. You can't impose a pace that is going to destroy the industry. I think today we have to take into account the economic reality on the ground and the technological reality. We need a healthy approach, a common sense approach. The problems faced by the automotive sector today are the result of the unilateral approach taken by the Commission and many members of this House, who have focused only on e-mobility and limiting CO2 emissions, and they have ignored competitiveness.
Colleagues, I do apologize for those who I will not give a floor. I use those criteria what I said before we started KHDI procedure, and now I would like to ask Valdis Dombrovskis.
You are Vice Chair of the Commission, and you have the floor now.
Honourable members, first of all, I would like to thank you for this important debate and relevant points that were raised. I have touched upon many of them in my introductory remarks, so I'm not going to repeat myself. We are aware that there are many challenges ahead, and we will closely monitor the developments, in particular on industrial employment, in the coming months. The Commission wants to ensure that the EU remains a global leader in the automotive industry, preserving jobs, manufacturing and technological know-how in Europe. The upcoming Clean Industrial Deal will improve the conditions for industry in the green transformation. The Commission will also develop, in close cooperation with social partners, the Quality Jobs Roadmap to ensure a fair transition for all, considering the urgent need for better anticipation and management of change and involvement of workers and stakeholders. And the next Commission will also develop an industrial action plan for an automotive sector. For this we'll need to have a holistic overview of short and medium-term challenges faced by automotive industry. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Executive Vice President. And we are closing, colleagues, debate on this point in agenda. And voting will take place on one of the next sessions. I do not have information on exactly on which one. Kolēģi, nākamais darba
Colleagues, the next item on the agenda is statement by the Vice President of the Commission, High Representative